there were different people, empires I would call them, French, Spanish, or Dutch. Their influence on literature of America was also there. Then the first writers brought mainly English ideas and ways of writing, which means early American literature is based on the literature of England. Okay, like early literature is based on the ideals of England, because England was the country whose strong influence was on the lives, on the culture, on the minds, on everything, on the civilization of the Americans. So if the influence was of the England on the lives of the people of the America, then definitely the early writings will be like similar to English literature. But after that, they actually shifted their categories of literature from the English literature. So as years passed and a literary theory developed, someone is requesting. As years passed and literary theory developed, the writers who adopted the English style are now sometimes called pale faces. So the people who have actually adopted the English style from the America, so those people been called as the pale faces. Like Franklin, Longfellow, James, and Pound, they were the writers, they have been called pale faces. It means the Native Americans, they were the red people, their skins were totally red, as you can imagine that when like a roasted chicken. So that skin suits them because the environment of the America at that time was very hot, and they were roaming all the time in the search of food, in the search of hunting from day to night. So their bodies, their skins were burnt. So the Native Americans were actually called the Red Indians for this sense, because their skins were red. On the other side, the white people, you see that Dutch, Spanish, French, and English people, they are white people. And they are not only white, but you know that they have the more white complexion that it seems that it is pale, it is yellowish. So the people, they were called pale faces because of this reason, because they try to imitate the writing style of English people. Their poetry is sometimes referred to as cooked poetry, because it was a cooked poetry because of the reason that they took their subjects sometimes, but they are taking the literary style of English people. So it was a cooked poetry, a kind of, you can say, intermixing of the things. On the other hand, there were authors who explored new topics and helped shape America's own literary traditions. So it is not the case that there were not the other people, like the true Americans or the pure Americans. They took this task and they explored new topics and helped shape America's own literary tradition. Because if they will be writing same as of the British or of the French as of the Dutch, it means that there will not be a new style that will be developing in America. So they will be the things will be merged, and they will do the same as the British, as the Spanish, as the other. But yet it needs to appear with a new spirit, with a new tradition, with a new idea of literature that must have been called as pure American literature. That is the reason that there were some writers, they try to focus on a separate literary tradition instead of they will be getting influenced by the Spanish and by the other people. So now we see that Who are they? Those are called redskins. Okay, redskins means the people who are originally the natives. They are actually Walt Whitman. Okay, so first writer is Walt Whitman, then Ralph Waldo Emerson, the second writer. The third is the Beat Generation. And one thing that is interesting to know about the people of Native America, like they are actually choosing their descriptive names. Like you see that their names are very descriptive. Sometimes they are taking their names with associated with the nature, with the components of the nature. Sometimes with the culture, sometimes with the animals, sometimes with the birds, because the Native American people had a strong affiliation with the nature. So like the nature was, they were actually dipped into the nature from head to toe. Like they have been taking, they take the names of the nature as their own personalities, for their own personalities. So like you see their names are very descriptive. Then their poetry is referred to as raw poetry, because the raw poetry is that belongs to the real America. Religion played an important part in the writers' lives. Many writings of the period were sermons and theological books. And the fact that the Pilgrims landed in the Massachusetts Bay in 1620 had an immense influence on the culture of the newly developing colonial system. Okay, now we see there is another influence, that is of the religion. Because you see that there were different pilgrims. Pilgrim is a person who comes to, who goes on a journey for any sacred mission, for any holy mission. You see that sometimes in Islamic world, there are some pilgrims like Haji. They are going for Umrah, they are going for Hajj in Saudi Arabia. So that is a pilgrim. So now there were different pilgrims in Massachusetts. They actually landed around about 1620, and those pilgrims had a strong influence on the colonial system, the developing colonial system, and they had also the strong influence on the writings of the Americans. Okay, now the topics common in the early periods were connected with the issues of living a new land. So now these are the topics that their poetry was all about. What are they? Their poetry was about agriculture. It was about exploration. It was about relations with the native people and the traveling. Because the travel logs or the traveling, it is another live experience from both of the sides, like from the Britishers or the other empires, and from the Native Americans too. So travel logs. So they have to talk about their travels. They have to talk about their migration from one place to another in the books, in the writings, in the poems. Similarly, agriculture, exploration, okay, and the relationship with the natives. These are the subjects of their literature. Okay, now we are coming towards the founding figure of American literature. And who is he? John Smith. John Smith from 1580 to 1631 is considered to be the first American writer. He was an explorer and colonist. He helped found Jamestown in 1607. A True Relation of Virginia is said to be the first American book written in English. It describes the problems of colonizing the area. So now John Smith considered to be the first writer. He was not purely an American writer, but he was English influenced writer. He actually wrote about the experience of colonization, that how did he feel to be a part of this, uh, I would say, this adventure, and how the other people from the other countries and from the other empires, how they experience colonizing the America, the newfound world. So he talked about the adventures of the colonizing land in his books. The first is A True Relation of Virginia. So this is the first American book that was written in English. Then William Bradford was a Puritan writer who described life in the early English settlements. His book of Plymouth Plantation is full of religious topics and depictions. So we have another writer after John Smith, that is William Bradford. Okay, and then is full of religious topics and depictions of a difficult life in the colony. So same is the case, as you can see, the life in the colonies is not easy all the time. You have studied in the seventh semester in Heart of Darkness, where the English people, the European people, they cannot feel ease while exploring the Congo jungle or the river. There were, I would say, that many issues and problems that they were facing all the time. So we can say that life in the colonies not easy. It is not easy. So the same is the case that he talked about, William Bradford talked about the experiences, these experiences at the colony, the experiences of the religion, the experiences of residing over there, about the settlements over there, about the culture, about teaching them moralities. It is not easy all the time. Then we have another writer, and it is Anne Bradstreet, and Bradstreet wrote lyrical, religious, and personal poetry. So she was the one who actually, I would say that, dared to write about the personal poetry, or you can also call it in the terms of what was his name, Sylvia Plath. In the terms of Sylvia Plath, because she is also an American writer, poetess. So she also written about the confessional poetry. So you can see that Anne Bradstreet was the inspiration for Sylvia Plath, because she has also written confessional poetry, and Anne Bradstreet, she has also written personal poetry and confessional poetry, and she is the author of To My Dear and Loving Husband. Then Mary Rodelson gives us the image of women's life in the colonial period. Her a narrative of the captivity and restoration of Mrs. Mary Rodelson's tells her story of being kidnapped by Native Americans. So the book became a bestseller. So she talks about the story of a kidnapped, of captivity of a soul, and that was kidnapped by the Native Americans in that book. So slowly and gradually it became the best-selling novel at that time, the book at that time. Okay, now we have talked about that this was the first phase of American literature. Now we are going to talk about, and I would say that this was a radical phase that we have talked about. Now we are going to talk about the revolutionary phase, the revolutionary period in America. And this is another good thing to know about, that the revolutionary period is all about making struggles or protesting against the hegemonic powers or the powerful, I would say, ideals, or the ideals and the seizures of the empires. So this is the revolutionary period that in which you will see that through the writings, through literature, the Americans will be protesting against the British, because you already know that America was the 13th colony of British Empire. Okay, America was a 13th colony of the British Empire. So America remained under the seizure of British Empire for almost 300 years, and America was the 13th colony. There were some, I would say, compulsions and restrictions and limitations on America, like they could not do their trade openly, and their shipment was blocked. The people remained hungry for many time, for a while, and there were many other restrictions and limitations that they imposed. The Britishers imposed on the Americans, not to live them their lives with freedom or with liberty. So what is this revolutionary period all about? It is about the tussles, it is about the fights, it is about the battles, it is about the protesting. And this is the period in which you will see that America was declared as an independent state round about 1776, 4 July 1776. Okay, so now just give it a reading as dissatisfaction with the colonial system. So now the first word will tell you about this, the dissatisfaction with the colonial system, and the relations with Britain grew. The literature gradually changed its shape. So now you see the literature that was with the strong influence of the British started early in the Americas, it was now changing its shape. पहले जो literature था, it was, I would say, the foundation, and there was strong influence of the Britishers or of the other nations on American literature. But now, whenever they have recognized about themselves, about their culture, about their lifestyle, that we are being mutilated, we are being exploited, we are being colonized, we are being treated slaves. So then they recognized not to do the same, not to follow them as their ideals or as their, I would say, as their icons. So they stopped following them and they decided to write their own literature instead of following the standards and the writing styles of the British literature. And what was it all about? So let me take a sip of water. Okay, so the writers became more politically anti-British and revolutionary oriented. So now you can see when it was the dissatisfaction with the colonial system, what happened? That they became anti-British and they became revolutionary oriented. Rationalism and enlightenment prevailed. What that rationalism and enlightenment was that prevailed in the country, it was that we must work for our own interests. We must not work under the interests of the British soldiers or the British armies. We must work under our interests, under our civilization and culture, that what we want. And if we just start following them in every matters, in every style, what will happen? That we will be exploited, and then we will be the same as we were before this century, in the 15th or in the 16th century. We will be exploited, then we will be mutilated in that sense. So they have thought about that we must spread the uh, the light of civilization in the whole country, and that was the real enlightenment, that they started realizing that we must now work with our own interests, but not in the interests of the British Empire. So they started writing essays, speeches, and pamphlets became more important. The Puritans' religious poetry fell out of flavor as man was not considered naturally sinful any longer. So you see that the Puritan movement that was started in England, and you remember that how Puritan movement was started soon after the Elizabethan age, and how this Puritan movement, with its strict practices, with strict religious practices, have exploited the people to follow the religion in their own terms, not in the terms of the gods. And they took the, I would say that lines of the Bibles, strict lines of the Bibles, to make the people believe that this is what God wants from you. And if they do not do, then they will be punished according to the Bible, according to the lines of the Bibles. So this is I would say that a strict practice of the religion in the era of Puritan. That was in the England. But you see that how that Puritan age, it spread all over the Europe, because the ideas, I would say they run like an eagle, like they transfer from one country to another, like at a high speed. So the Puritan ideals or the ideas, they were also transferred into the America as well. And then you see the Americans, they were also influenced by the religiosity of the Puritans. So Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, you might know his name. He is also one of the most, I would say, that revolutionary, one of the most intellectual, literary figure in America. So Benjamin Franklin, he is basically not one man. I would say that he is every man. He is the most important figures of the period. He can be described as what we call a Renaissance man, a person of many skills. He was a politician, scientist, philosopher, publisher, humorist, inventor, and writer. So the way to wealth, so there is a book, The Way to Wealth, gives the reader advice how to become successful. Yeah, definitely he can do that because he was already successful. He was a man, he was an artist with so many qualities, with so many skills. Politician, scientist, philosopher, publisher, humorist, inventor, and writer. So he can write that book to make the people believe how to become a successful man. Hard work and common sense are very important. So now you will see, because I was talking about the American dream. So this is the American dream, that how you can become successful. Hard work and common sense are very important. Autobiography. Franklin writes about his life, his successes and failures, individualism. His style is very plain. It is one of the first depictions of the American dream. Okay, so at that time you see that rather if this idea of American dream wasn't initiated, but it was the America or the Americans, they were working in this streamline. They were all working in this streamline of American dream. और आपने देखा है कि जितने भी Americans हैं, they all work hard and hard. Like you see that every man, वो अपने लिए काम भी करता है, अपनी जॉब भी करता है, स्टडी भी करता है, and they have the responsibilities. They have the responsibilities. They are, I would say, that hard-working people in every matter. So they do that. So this is the American dream. To become a successful, you have to do hard works. Then we have, after Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine. It is not Thomas, as like most of us we call Thomas Hardy. It is Thomas. Thomas Paine was an English-born essayist and pamphleteer. Pamphleteer is one who actually writes pamphlets. Who writes pamphlets. So his pamphlet Common Sense is a sharp critique of the colonial system and explains why the Americans should rise against the English. So now you see that in American literature, those founding figures, the revolutionary figures who are entrusted or supposedly to talk about against the British people or against the interest of the British Empire, those are considered the American revolutionary figures. Okay, those are called the American revolutionary figures because they favored the narratives of the Native American people. And if they supported and favored the narrative of the American people, it means that they are also the revolutionary figure and they do not want America to be exploited by the British anymore. It means this is how the writings or through writings and through literature, you can change the entire world. So this is, I would say, the perfect example. Like we most of the time find a solution that the solution is only in the battles and the wars. And there is no solution through literature, through different agreements, through different texts. But there is. Because you see that these people, like they also fought for their interests, they also fought for their rights, but the writers of that time, they were all the time struggling to make up the minds of the people that you must protest against, you must protest against. The writers and on the other side, some revolutionary figures and the people, they actually both simultaneously fought against the rule of the British. And then they got success in that. They were succeeded with the favor of the writers, with the you can say this thing gives them encouragement. Okay, so it was the sharp critique against the rule of the England. Then John Hector St. John, 1735 to 1830, was a French-American writer, one of the fathers of the American novel. So he is also considered to be the father of American novel. His epistolary novel. Epistolary novel is a technique. I think that you must write every single word, technique, the genres that we are studying today for your own interest. Because you have to just remember every single detail of this. Not only for my subject, but for yourselves. Because you just need to update yourself with different literary conceptions. So what is epistolary? Epistolary is all about the technique of writing letters. The technique of writing letters. So a series of letters that is actually sent and received by the sender and the receiver. So that is called epistolary. You might have observed that there were, I could not remember, खुतबाते वो क्या थे जो आप उर्दू में पढ़ते होते थे? खुतबाते गालिब, or I think someone else. I forgot the name of that book. If you remember, some of you. So that was also a kind of, you can say, epistolary, in which a series of letters is actually exchanged with one another. So this is another genre of epistolary. So novel Letters from an American Farmer deals with the differences between life in Europe and in America. So it is a series of letters that were transferred from one place to another, just to know about that what are the circumstances at British and what are at the Americas. Thomas Jefferson, another most important literary figure, and I will call not him as a literary figure, but most importantly, he was a political figure, and he was the one who actually spotted the idea of American Revolution, and he was succeeded. Who was he? Just take a look. 1743 to 1826, Thomas Jefferson. And you know that he was also one of the early American founding figures, and he was an architect, essayist, lawyer, politician, and later became the third president of the United States of America. So Thomas Jefferson was the third president of the United States of America. His greatest contribution to the history of America is that he is the main author of the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence was in which America was declared as an independent or free state. So America is no more under the custody, under the surveillance, under the rule of the British. America is now totally free to practice its religious, social, cultural, and historical customs. So there is no compulsion, no restrictions, no limitations on America anymore. So he was the one who actually wrote the Declaration of Independence, in which America stated herself as an independent state without the rule of the British, which was adopted by the Continental Congress on 4th July 1776. So this is 4th July 1776 when America was declared as an independent state by the Continental Congress. Because you have to remember the information for your own sake. During the War of Independence.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, next lecture का time हो गया.
But that next lecture is supposed to be at 10:30.
Okay, sir.
If you do not know, then you must have asked to Tuba, because she told me that the next lecture is at 10:30. Isn't it, Tuba? Arsalan.
Yes, sir. It is on 10:30.
You can. There is no way to interrupt me in this case, because I think that we have taken our class lately, so you must stick with this thing till we complete with the things. Okay, that's not a good idea. Okay, so we talked about that this is also called the War of Independence, and it is also called the Declaration of Independence because it was the long struggle by the Americans to win their country back from the Britishers and by the other people. And British remained for almost 300 years in the America, and after that British was gone. For illustration, read the now coming towards a period of romanticism and transcendentalism. And I would say that this is another important phase. And you see that how gradually America is coming on its feet, because it starts with the discovery, and after that there was a strong influence on American literature, on the lives of the people, on the minds of the people, and after that then the writings, the second phase, the writings were, you can say there were different writers of the British and the Americans. The subjects were the Americans, the language was British, and then they talked about. And now the third phase will be about when American writings are going to be pure, totally pure, without, I would say, without the language of the English people, and without the ideals, especially ideals, because the language is, the American language is also the same of the British. But we see that the ideas in literature, they are different from them. They are different from the Britishers. So the period of Romanticism and Transcendentalism, it started in 1800 and 1880. It lasted till 1880. Okay, now you see there is a positive change in American literature, and what that positive change is that now America is totally free now to practices. I have already said its customs and all other things, and that is it is not the case that America is totally only free in one case, in one section of life. America is also free in writing, in literature too. So if America is free in literature, so America can write freely about any concept that they like. Because before that, before 1776, when America was not free, so they were bound to follow the Britishers. But they are not bound to follow the Britishers. Similar is the case with the subcontinent. When we got freedom, and before 1947, we were not free, we were not independent to write about the subjects freely, about the religious matters, about the cultural matters. No. But now we are free to write about. That is the reason. That is the main, I would say, idea of the freedom. Because you can write anything, whatever you like. So we see that this period of Romanticism and Transcendentalism, it was started soon after the Declaration of Independence on 1776. And it changed the society, the outlook of the society, the overview of the society entirely. Because you are now free to write about those areas, those fields, those subjects that you were not writing before. So the period of Romanticism represented a revolt against classicism. And let me tell you one more. You know that 1800 in the British is the starting of the Romanticism. You know that, like from 1798 to 1837, when this was the era of Romanticism, and Romanticism was started in England with the publications of lyrical ballads by S.T. Coleridge and William Wordsworth, and they started this movement in England round about 1800, the start of the 1800 and the start of the 19th century, the last of the 18th century. And after that, after the ascension of the throne by Queen Victoria, the Victorian age was started on 1837. Now we see that this is another strong influence. Another strong influence that was started in America. It was with different, otherwise it is a kind of, I would say, a trajectory. A trajectory. What is a trajectory? Trajectory is a line, a light line that I would say that walks through the space. So this is a trajectory line that every country is influenced with the idea, with developing in any idea. Similarly, with the Europe and in the West, in the Europe and in the West. So that trajectory or that light, it walks and it gives the benefit to every country equally. So that is the trajectory line, I would call it. And this is the I would say that the period of Romanticism, it was not in the British also, but it was in the America too. So what is the Romanticism? That, like them, they went against the classical standard, the classical rules of the country, and of the other forms, like you can say empiricism, like the reasons, the form of writings. They went against them because this was another, I would say, approach of Romanticism in which the subjective writings are given to be more preference rather than the imperial and the old type of literature. Okay, so now the period of Romanticism, a revolt against. Okay, so a period of Romanticism represented a revolt against classicism. It was the revolt against the classicism. What is classicism? Like the old ideals, old forms of literature, old forms, old standards. So they were the classicism, and its values such as reason and form. The American variant of Romanticism was different from the European one to a certain degree. So it is not the same Romanticism as it is in the Europe or as it is in the British. It is a different Romanticism. There was a great interest in Indians and their culture. The writings were less political and religious. The topics were mostly American, and the writers stressed imagination, nature, and individualism. So now you see that what is real Romanticism? That Romanticism is in which you see that they are rejecting their old ideals, like the standards, the models, the literary figures like Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, and many of the others in that Romanticism. And they are focusing on the subjectivity. But in the American, they are not doing this. Rather, they are subjective, but not individual subjective. They are, I would say, that the advocates of their culture, of their Indian culture. They are the advocates of their Indian culture. Their focus stresses on the imagination, nature, and individualism. And individualism not as an individual person, I would say, individualism as a separate state. Because this gives the meaning of national consciousness. Like you see that national consciousness is necessary to defend your country against the external powers, against the external, I would say, countries. So national consciousness is individualism in that sense. You are living in the circle, you are living under the boundary of your nation, of your state, and what you are doing, you are defending your culture. So the Americans starting defending their cultures, their Indian cultures, the real Indian cultures, and they stressed on imagination, nature, because nature was the civilization for them, nature was the culture for them, nature was the religion for the Americans, nature was the lifestyle for them, nature was everything for them. So they stressed on nature. And so this was all about the period of Romanticism, and we'll be discussing about the Transcendentalism, because Transcendentalism is another literary philosophy, and it has, I would say, that more explanation that we can imagine. And this is the philosophy that I would say drag the people to know about their beings, to know about their existence and presence on the lands. So we will be discussing about the Transcendentalism, that what is all about, and inshallah in the next lecture. So till then, I think that you have another class, and if we will be discussing about Transcendentalism, so we will be lack of time. So if you have to ask any question related to anything that we've discussed today in this lecture, you may ask right now. Yes, sir.
Sir, kindly share slides with us.
I have asked you people to ask questions, not to ask for the slides. And most of the time, what I have observed that you
Sir,
all were
मैंने
Sir, I
sleeping,
have a question.
पूछा था slide show नहीं हो रही थी.
and you were all sleeping. What I have observed, because whenever I asked,
Sir, I have a question.
okay, wait a minute. Whenever I have asked question, you people didn't respond. Like you must have responded whatever I have asked, but you did not bother to ask, even though to respond anything and to ask anything. You are just passive listeners, and I don't know that whether you have understood something about this or not. But I think that you must be active listener all the time. You may ask anything about any concept that you didn't understand. So I think that now you must be working on the ideas. Yes, Rabia.
Sir, I have a question, sir. But why revolutionary poets are different from romanticism poets?
Why the romantic revolutionary poets are different from?
The romanticism poets. You have told, but I skipped this point.
But we haven't talked about the romantic poets yet. We've only talked about the revolutionary poets.
You told that revolutionary poets are different because they talked about America. America is free like
Okay,
that.
okay, okay. Let me clarify. See, yes, you can mute your mic. See, when we have in the revolutionary phase, what are your writings about? Your writings are all about the government, the power that is in your land. So your most of the writings about them, because you want them to leave the land, you want them to evacuate the lands, because that is the reason that your writings are also revolutionary writings. You are actually encouraging your people to write about them, to write against the British, to write against their culture, to write against them, so that we all must be at one page. And when they are gone after 1776, the new era is started, and that era is of romanticism. And in the romanticism, now people's focus is not to kick off the forces, the British forces anymore from the country. No, their focus is not, because they are already gone, and America is declared as an independent state. So what they have to do, they have to just build themselves stronger and stronger with their culture, with their ideals, with their language, with their concepts, and this is what they are doing in romanticism, because this is not anymore the revolutionary period in which they have to just get rid of the British people, the British Empire. Is that clear? Is that clear, Rabia?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's good. Yes, anyone else?
Excuse me, sir. Sir, according to
Yes.
an article that I have read, I have come to know that North Americans are more religious than Europeans. What is your on take on this opinion? Is this opinion true or false? Also, I would like to request you that in the next upcoming lecture, please point out some of the differences, major differences between American culture and European culture. It would be good. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Fahad. Yes, there is I would say, a
Sir, I-
great change in the culture of America and the British. Definitely, we have talked about in today's lecture about those differences. But if you need so, we can be talking about in another lecture about the differences too. Yes, you talked about that why their beliefs, Native Americans or the Americans' beliefs are more stronger than the people of the British and all of the others. We see that they are using religion. The Britishers, they are using religion only for an agenda, but the Americans are actually worshipping their gods. They are worshipping. They are having the beliefs of the religion with their interests. Okay, so we see that their beliefs are more stronger than the Britishers. Like they have the majority of the Britishers. They are the believers of the nature, and that is the concept of pantheism, because they see that the God is present everywhere. The God is in every shape. God is in the tree. God is in the jungle. God is in the animals. God is everywhere. So their love for nature is basically the love for religion. So that is the concept of pantheism, and that is the reason that they are more stronger and more good believers than of the Britishers. Is that clear? Because I just wanted to give a short answer because your time is for the next class. Yes,
Yes, sir.
Fahad?
Yes, sir. It's clear.
Thank you so much. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for attending today's lecture, and I hope so that you have understood every little detail that we've talked about the American literature, about the background of American literature. So you can take your next class, and if you have any question, you can ask me in the next class, in the next lecture. Okay. So till then, take care. Allah Hafiz. Bye bye.